Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and in studio this time around, State Representative Chris Markey is joining us. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure. How are you?
It's good to see you again. I'm doing well.
Good.
It's summer's winding down here, but and things will start to get more active up on Beacon Hill with summer ending. The summer session, if you will, is coming to an end.
Yeah, next week it will after Labor Day.
But the last time we did a show, the budget hadn't been passed. Rep. Cabral was in doing the show, and the budget hadn't passed. It finally passed. I guess as we look at it, just for in general for folks, the overall assessment from your standpoint of just the budget in general.
I think it's the appropriate stuff that we're doing. The long-term investments that we're making are really important, with early childhood education all the way through to higher ed, and giving people a second chance with the community college. Those things are huge for a return on investment. I mean, there's so many people out there, particularly in southeastern Massachusetts, who quite didn't finish their associate's degree or get a certificate or do something. Bristol Community College, Massasoit, and Cape Cod Community College now are going to give those people the opportunity to finish what they started and probably were interrupted by either family or something that prevented them from getting to the point of finishing up. So I think it's a great idea, and hopefully that return on investment will come back for all of us.
One of the things I was hearing, and I was debating with another person, but the Education Reform Act that you guys put together, the folks were saying, oh no, the formula needs to be fixed. I'm like, the formula just got fixed.
Well,
but COVID kind of delayed things.
COVID delayed things, but the idea behind it is there's certain presumptions with the formula. One is a tax rate that is at a particular level. Also, the idea that, again, there is going to be needs in some of the more urban areas where there's
Correct.
English language learners and all of that. So the formula as a whole, I think, with the expectations of some of those things, works very well. For instance, in Dartmouth, we have a very low tax rate. It's like the 39th lowest in the Commonwealth. They're hurt by the formula to some degree, but we also need to look at it and say, hey, do we need to increase our tax rate in Dartmouth? It's not politically correct, and it's not easy to do, but it's something that we need to look at. Those are at least in my mind, the two things that aren't going to be really politically accepted in towns like Dartmouth or Fairhaven or Mattapoisett. One is the formula, and in education, two is housing. We need to assist some of these urban areas in housing and expanding housing, much like we did in the 50s and 60s, where we can get home ownership in smaller communities where houses are smaller, first-time home buyers, and find developments that focus on that. It's a huge part of our economy, and we can create a middle class when we do that. If we keep going the way we're going and just subsidizing rentals, it's making rich landlords richer, and it's keeping people down in rental properties, and they can never get out of that way and get a home because of the limited supply. And when the supply is that low, the demand goes high, and simple economics, the prices go up. We need to find a way to work that out in zoning changes in some of the suburban towns.
Just going back to the education, I mean, you were talking, we've done the show for a while now, I know you were talking that you were pleased with the formula as it was for New Bedford in particular, because New Bedford was getting more monies for different things in education, but I remember you were talking about that, and you were pleased that the formula sort of adjusted things for New Bedford.
Yes, I think they need that, and I think it's going to work out better for New Bedford, and Dartmouth has to start to reflect on what they're doing and what their priorities are, and I think they have.
Because you guys did a lot of work on that education.
That was 6 or 7 years in the making.
Right.
I mean, probably even longer, but 6 or 7 real years of doing that.
As you talk about housing, and it's interesting too, because one of the things that has been talked about is that for a developer to develop here in New Bedford, all things being equal, the cost of building something, supplies, labor, whatever, is kind of the same. So a developer looks at building, say, here in New Bedford and looking in Boston and saying, well, I'm going to make more in Boston because I can charge a $4,000 rent versus down here.
Well, first off, there's not really a lot of places you can build lots of housing in New Bedford, just plain out of space. That's why some of these suburban towns, we need to look at that and reflect, because in the end, the people who have had the luxury and the privilege of living in Dartmouth and Fairhaven and Lakeville, Freetown, all these suburban towns have usually benefited from Fall River or New Bedford, business-wise, whatever. You know, you go down to the waterfront and you see who owns the fish houses. Guys live in Dartmouth or Mattapoisett or Marion or Fairhaven. Their employees live in New Bedford. We need to make it affordable for those employees to make sure that they can survive, and then maybe they can move out into a little suburban area where they can have a 2 or 3 bedroom ranch for a reasonable price. And if we can develop that and change our zoning, I think it can happen.
And I know folks talk about the old Holy Family, Holy Name school that's being transformed into apartments as sort of a model of how things can.
Yeah, I mean there's one, and then across on Union Street they just did a groundbreaking last week.
Right.
That's been in the process for a while, and that's great, but that's not real home ownership where you got a yard, you got
right,
that,
yeah.
You have an investment in the community. Once you have an investment in the community, all of a sudden you have an investment in the schools. Once you have an investment in the schools, things get better, and it works that way. It's not pretty, it's not elaborate, but I think our parents' generation saw that there's success in that. You buy a small house, you move up to a bigger house when you save enough and you have enough equity in your home, and you start to create the middle class. Right now, I think the fact that we have so many people renting and so few landlords, that it's just going to create this huge gap between the rich and the poor. And that's, at least in my humble opinion, the biggest difference between having a middle class and not having a middle class is home ownership. It's the biggest investment I have in my house, in my life.
Right, for a lot of people. Obviously, we've got to talk about the Star Store, which was a budget issue. It was in the House budget, not in the Senate budget. Obviously, I know you can't speak to the Senate budget side of it, but I'm curious as to, as you look at where it is right now, where do you think the Star Store situation will go?
Well, the school's already picked a place in Dartmouth at the market center or town center, where they're going to be putting in some of the studios in there. They're going to use the campus. They've already told that in the last 24 hours. I don't know what's going to happen with the building itself. It's a private piece of property owned by a private developer. So I would just want to make sure that if we do something, it's consistent with what I think everybody wants in the city, which is a lot of art stuff. I think it's, if you work downtown like I do, that you see the benefits of having lots of young, energetic people and enthusiasm within the town. It's good for the nightlife. It's good for everything.
Is there disappointment from your standpoint that this wasn't continued?
Yeah, I mean, look, yes, there's absolute disappointment. There's no doubt about that. But we have to look at it and go, it just didn't work out. And it didn't work out for a variety of reasons, and they were all good reasons. We put it in the budget. We've routinely done it for the last 23 years or 20 years. There was a short-term lease agreement for this year. It was $2.7 million. The Senate, rightfully so, saw that, and it was a reasonable, Mark owes a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayer. He saw it as, hey, we're not going to get the asset. Why should we be paying the rent that we're paying if we're not going to get the asset back?
And for people who don't understand what you're talking about, the way it worked is after 20 years, the UMass Dartmouth was supposed to purchase that building for $1.
Yeah.
And basically that would become a UMass Dartmouth facility, like a facility on the campus in Dartmouth.
So the agreement was that it got extended out for a couple years, and the university did not want to purchase it even for $1 or be given it because of the costs of the upkeep of the building and putting it back into all the standards that are required for environmental reasons, energy reasons, disability reasons. They were going to have to spend $35 to $50 million, depending on who you talk to. It could be as low as $35 million, but to say that's the low end. The university has a fiduciary responsibility to 10,000 students, not just to 150. And they saw that if we have to spend $35 million on 150 students, that's $300,000 a student. And is that a good financial decision for the university when they've maxed out their ability to borrow for their own deferred maintenance on campus with the UMass Building Authority? They've entered into partnerships, private partnerships, to develop dormitories within the circle that you've seen now. And then they still have this deferred, about $700 million worth of deferred maintenance. So they looked at it as, we still don't even have our own piece of property in order yet. We need to get that in order, and then we can start to do these things. And Mark is right by saying, hey, we're throwing bad money after bad money. And why are we doing that? And so his decision to not put it in the budget was a reasonable decision. It's the consequences that we all don't like, but that's part of being in this life is that we make these decisions and we have to live with the consequences. And the decisions by the chancellor were the right decisions for them. And the decision by Mark to not put it in the budget was the right decision for him. So,
And the House put it in, though, again.
yeah, but we did it. This was Mark's, development. Like he put a lot of time and effort into it over the last 20 years. So I don't begrudge him, and I don't begrudge the university. It just didn't work out. It wasn't. The change in circumstances didn't allow it to continue on. The question is how do we respond to it? And we can sit here and we can point the finger at this guy or that person or this organization or whatever it is. I don't like doing that. I look at it in a very objective way and try to figure out what it is that we can do with the building now, or try to encourage someone to do with the building now. That's what I hope we can do in the long term for it. But I would try to focus. I mean, the city just spent $9 million, I think, of ARPA money to, I think it's 9, to the Zeitarian, which is right across the street or diagonally across the street, for their arts and development. I think that's a good investment for the arts. We want to continue that with the Star Store building, and how we do it, I don't know. But it's not in my hands to do, and it's not in the mayor's hands to do, and it's not in Senator Montigny's hands to do. It's up to the owner of the building, and however they do it, maybe he sells it to somebody.
So the developer still owns the building,
Yes.
for folks that don't understand. It is a private developer
Yep.
that owns the building, and he will have the opportunity to sell it.
Yes.
And I haven't been in it in a while, but as you look at it, and I understand the disability and things like that, as you look at the building, just as a layman, do you see a lot of work that needs to be done?
It depends on what you want to do with it. Right? I mean, if you want to put in apartments and you want to develop it commercially, or you want to do retail, whatever it is, I don't know. I think it depends, but there's going to need to be some work done on some of the machinery and infrastructure of the building. From what people have told me, and what DCAM, which is in charge of all state buildings, and the University of Massachusetts Building Authority have evaluated it and thought that it was going to be a substantial amount of money that they didn't have to invest into it. So I think, again, going back to what's the mission of the decisions that Mark made, I think are consistent with his responsibility. You can agree to disagree, and you can, the same thing with Chancellor Fuller. He made the right decision for the university. I mean, he has a fiduciary responsibility to 9,850 other students to make sure that they're running their institution as efficiently as possible for the best benefit and get your bang for your buck. And that was the decision that he made.
Sticking with the downtown area, I know that State Pier obviously was in the news, the redevelopment of State Pier. It seems as though the proposal as it is right now has gone by the wayside, as the developer there is sort of, I don't know what the correct term is, but they've pulled out their proposal. But it's...
Yeah, so it wasn't pulled out, it was denied and said that there were issues with the proposal.
Right, but they didn't, they just didn't sign up and say, okay, we're going to do it, I guess. They sort of...
It's a much more complicated thing, but this is essentially is that there was a proposal that probably was not financially secure to be able to survive what the law is.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the law is to allow for a 25% development of the pier. That 25% would all be encompassed along MacArthur Boulevard.
Right.
So that there would be retail, restaurant, retail stores, things like that. And you got to remember here that from 30,000 feet above is New Bedford is one of 4 deep water ports in the Commonwealth. And if we're coming off of COVID and we realize the needs for certain infrastructure that's already established and at its location, this is one of them. Brayton Point in Somerset is one, New Bedford is one, Salem is one, and Boston is one. We're required under law to provide industry or marine industry in that area. If we get rid of that and put it all retail, we're losing that asset as a state, which, okay, maybe, for 15 to 20 years it's a great thing to have, you have stores down there and others, but what happens if we have a crisis? And we need that port to be able to, whether it be to assist in some type of wartime thing, some type of economic disaster. Is it an opportunity for transportation for cargo? All of those things are really important for the long-term investments of the Commonwealth. And considering there's only 4, you got to make sure we keep that.
Yep.
So understanding that, and understanding the investments we put in the last 8 years of putting in refrigeration and insulation into the cold storage area that the city had begged for, and that we put in. Those are things that we want to make sure stay and are utilized and get a return on the investment. So we can't just wipe out the whole pier and say, okay, we're going to just have, it's going to look like Newport or Nantucket. Right. It's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. But what we can do is say, all right, there's other parts of this, whether it be offshore wind or whether it be the retail areas, we can adjust that and use it for mixed use to some degree. And I think that's what we did as a delegation, is we got to a decision where we were happy with. The problem with the development or the developer is they weren't financially secure to do it. There was issues with the way in which the mechanism in which they were trying to come in as one group, where clearly the law is you couldn't do that. They were looking for a very long-term lease, and if we learned anything from, they originally were looking for a 99-year lease. Then they want a 35-year lease if they couldn't get it, but then they were going to need assistance, financial assistance for it. So we just learned from the Star Store maybe not to do these long-term leases. Yeah. So the idea being that the secure thing to do is figure out, go back to the drawing board and get people to maybe buy up individually and lease out the areas and develop it. So if you wanted a restaurant, you get your 2,000 square feet, whatever it is, on the ground. You take that and you can put whatever you want there and have it as a 30-year lease or 25-year lease or whatever it is.
So there is opportunities to do some developing.
Oh, yeah. We're not. It was more of a process issue, which we felt to be significant. That's why we objected to it.
And is it still, as you look at it, you were saying it was 25%. Is it that much still, or do you think?
Yeah, no, nothing's changed in the law. Nothing's changed in the law. I mean, the one thing that I'd say is one of the proposals was to have a fish company that doesn't process anything, doesn't unload anything there, but just use the cold storage. So what they would be doing is coming in from the road and putting it into the cold storage
facility, yeah.
So the idea that there was some type of marine use on the other end where the bulkhead is of the State Pier, where it goes into the harbor, that wasn't being utilized at all. In fact, right now they have the door shut. I think there's materials in front of it. So the idea is we want things coming in
Right.
from the water, utilizing that, and then going out, not coming in, storing it. I mean, we can just throw up a refrigerated warehouse out at Industrial Park or at the new industrial. We can go anywhere to do that.
Right.
But the idea being is we want to utilize that waterfront to the maximum ability we can. And we were for years. We were bringing in the Clementines, and
Right.
then I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, it just kind of stopped. I don't know why, but it did.
And how does that differ in a sense from what you're talking about with the Marine Commerce Terminal, which is just wind farms? For people that don't know, people might say, well, the state's got the Marine Commerce Terminal too. That's the location for the wind farm work that's being done.
Yeah, and that's the primary location, and then there's a private pier, which was the old Eversource, which is going to be utilized for that as
Right,
well.
Foss Terminal, yep.
And then some people want to try to use some of that waterfront at State Pier for offshore wind. I don't know if that will work economically. Is it a kind of a quick money grab for offshore wind to keep it secured and then own it, or have the lease on it and then sublet it to somebody else and try to make money off of the lease as opposed to making money off of the property and doing the work? So there's a whole variety of things that were of issue with the State Pier, and we think we can solve those with a new RFP, and I think the administration saw the concerns that we had.
Do you have a timetable as to get things going?
My understanding is they're looking to put an RFP out this fall.
Oh, okay. So that
Yep.
is fast, pretty
Yep.
quick, yeah. I want to ask, we're running out of time, I know, but I wanted to ask too, you and I were talking about, I know you've talked about this in the past. I was seeing over the weekend childcare, which has been something you've talked about. But federally, at the end of September, because of the COVID money, lots of money is going to disappear for childcare facilities all across the country. There wasn't anything specific to Massachusetts, but obviously Massachusetts being part of that. There's concern of layoffs for folks who won't, for facilities that won't be able to afford their workers, or, as a matter of fact, facilities may be closing because they're not getting the monies. As someone who's talked about this for years, I know childcare is important when you're talking about bringing workers back, people, as you said, going to school, the BCC and stuff. How can the state sort of look at that issue, and it's a nationwide issue, but what can the state do to help those facilities here in Massachusetts?
Well, I think first is one of them is to understand the problem, right? The problem is that we had a huge problem post-COVID getting people back to work. Lots of people were concerned about their kids. One is for, they were going hybrid schools. So for like a year and a half, we had this whole phenomenon of hybrid school or stay-at-home school, and then that resulted in parents not being able to go to work. And they didn't have daycare. They couldn't bring them somewhere. Then we had daycare workers who were concerned about them getting COVID and saying this isn't worth it. And their decision for their family was, I don't want to work there. I don't want to do this. And then we had the essential workers, as we call them, that needed daycare. So there was a great need for it. And in basic economics, when there is a huge need and demand and there is a minimal supply, the costs go up. The federal government realized that during that crisis, and they funded a lot of money towards that and controlling that. So when we take a look at we've raised the standard, raised the costs and all of that, now they're pulling the money. But the child care workers are still expecting this pay.
Right.
Yet there's no increase in revenues for the daycare facility. There's no subsidies and the Y has a huge problem. I mean, that's my concern. I actually spoke with the director at the Y, and we had a conversation about it at a chamber meeting where he said, this is a huge problem. We're going to lose a whole bunch of staff because of this. And for the last 3 years, we've relied on that money to be able to keep our staff going.
And the average cost for daycare, $10,000. That's just the average cost.
Yeah. So we have to figure out a solution to getting more people being daycare workers and child care workers early
There's
on.
a shortage of that, right now.
Just like with nurses, it's a huge problem.
Yep.
So we've done things. We've put money towards incentives towards that towards pay, towards education, and subsidize that. The degree in which we're going to have to do is see how bad it is, and then we're going to probably have to have a supplemental budget along the way to take care of that. But there are a massive amounts of programs and creative ways that meeting with daycare providers from Little People's College and listening to what they had to say about the importance of it, listening to the why, the importance of making sure that they have the best trained people, and the difficulties of getting that, and how do we do it. And they said, loan forgiveness, subsidies towards education, credits, whatever they can find, they're trying to find ways towards doing that.
And I think people don't realize too, it's not like you can just come off the street either. People, there are some standards to be a child care worker that you have to meet.
Yeah. So it's not as simple as what people think. It's, just throw money at it and do it. But our nursing crisis is huge.
Burnt out, but just burned out.
Yeah, but you look at it and go, we'll just get more nursing schools, right? Well, colleges are seeing it and they're getting it. They're having a tough time getting faculty members.
Right.
And if you don't have faculty members, you can't teach. And then the other part about it is you got to have beds to have them educated on. So you got to have hospitals that are willing to go into this academic setting and have an opportunity for for nursing students to go and get the experience so that they can get good at their job. So all of those things have to come together. You can't just say, put up a sign and say, this is a nursing school. And, you got to have professionals teaching it. You got to have the qualifications of all the academics. Then you got to, so the infrastructure has to be there. And then you need to have the beds available to bring the students in. But, my daughter just graduated from high school, and when we went to the awards night, there was probably 15 girls who got awards who were all going to nursing school. They were in the top of their class. So it was exciting to see that.
Right.
But it's going to be interesting to see how we do over the next 5 to 10 years on the nursing front, to see if what we're doing now since COVID has really paid off.
And when you think about it, the state, I don't want to say it can't do everything. It can't just be a state, a legislative or whatever issue that you guys have to fix. It's going to take private, public, a lot of things.
Well, no, I'm a moderate. I'm a middle of the road person. There's some things that I'm very liberal on and some things I'm very conservative on. Probably offend a lot of people by those positions, but I do it. Because I think in the end, if you have a balance, you do it. But number one is capitalism. We got to let the private sector figure it out. We can subsidize and do things. And I always say this about, we used to invest a ton of money into NASA and into the defense. And the technologies that came out of the defense contracts and NASA were because the government founded and then capitalism took over. We always talk about Velcro and things like that, GPS. All of that came from the military or NASA. That's an everyday occurrence. We couldn't afford it 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Now it's in everyone's phone, it's everywhere, it's on cars, it's everything. If we can give the subsidies, offshore wind is the closest example for us. Giving these subsidies now, we believe will pay off in the end for the private sector. We build roads and invest in roads and transportation and communication because we believe that those investments will pay off for business and an economy in the private sector. That's what we have to look at, is what can we invest in today that is going to help the private sector along the way. Healthy people will do that. Good nurses will do that. We need to get nursing students into schools that are qualified to get them to take care of people who will be our employees, to take care of the roads or offshore wind or whatever. So it's a big cycle of it.
We've got to leave it at that.
Okay.
Lots on the plate today. Thanks for coming in. That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. My thanks to Chris Markey for being our guest. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.